John Lanchester, thank you for this reception in the hotel here in Stuttgart. You have written a novel, Kapital, who relates the life of some residents in the Pepys Road in the south of London. Why did you choose this particular road with houses, I think, built in the late 19th century?
It's very similar to the part of London I live in, which is Clapham, and it's interesting to me for a number of reasons. London's a city that's gone through an extraordinary amount of change, really a revolutionary amount of change in the last 20-25 years. But it's happened incrementally, bit by bit, and because of that, I think people sometimes don't actually see it, because it's happened so slowly. And I wanted to write about this street because I wanted to write about the way that London's become this very, very different city.
Mm-hmm. The title seems to suggest a story about money, financial questions. What is the main idea of your novel?
Well, Kapital has multiple meanings in English. It means Kapital in the German sense, but it also means die Hauptstadt. And because London is the centre of finance, it's also the capital city of the country. And I was really, rather than a single determinate meaning, I was really wanting to write about all the things going on in the city and the kind of place it's become and the reasons it's become a kind of a world city in a way that it didn't used to be. No, the German translation is entirely right, but there are other senses as well. There is no German word that gets, Kapital and Hauptstadt in the same phrase. So money and the financial crisis and that very fundamental shift that's happened since 2007, those are all at the centre of the book.
Mm-hmm. Kapital is a fiction book.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The Pepys Road stands for London, but is much more than a microcosm.
Yes, but I'm interested in that, in the way that London, the world presses on London, and then London presses on this street. It's not exactly a microcosm, but it does reflect these wider, both the themes to do with finance and inequality and things like that, but also just straightforwardly the people. The people are from everywhere, in the way that they are in the city.
Mm-hmm. Some of these people are concerned by the financial crisis as a Jans. Roger Jant is a merchant banker and his wife Arabella likes to go shopping.
Yes, they're the people who are in the world of the book most closely linked to finance directly, and they're also most closely linked to the arc of, in 2007 no one knew what was going to happen. There was general obliviousness and they didn't see this crash coming, and they're at the centre of that story.
Mm-hmm. Roger Jant, the banker, does he has an example in real life or in your mind?
No, he's not based on a real person. There are plenty of people around who, as the book begins, his personal finances, he's depending on getting a bonus of £1 million that year, and there are plenty of people in that kind of position. But he isn't drawn directly from one person.
He dreams about his bonus, and his wife lives as they would already received the £1 million of bonus. And is this symptomatic for these people, these bankers who seem to have lost a sense of reality?
Yes, I think there is something out of touch with reality about the sort of sequence of thoughts whereby he's convinced himself that he needs £1 million. Mm-hmm. It's not just, it doesn't seem like a luxurious or optional. He actually needs it in order to get his finances straight, and there definitely is something out of touch with reality about that.
Mm-hmm. The oldest resident in the Pepys Street is Petunia Love, 82 years old, and she was born in the street and lives since there in the street, and she's the oldest person in the street, isn't it so?
Yes, I wanted to have one. There is a fundamental shift in the kind of demographics of who lives in those houses now. They have undergone a very profound change. But I wanted to have one person who had this kind of continuity with the historic past of the kinds of people the houses were built for. And often in those streets there are very few people left who were living there before the sort of huge social change. And Petunia is a character who does represent this sort of the past of the city and the past of the street.
Let's speak about some other characters of the people in the Pepys Road. There are also the Camels, a Muslim family who runs a news agent, or Zbigniew, he comes from Poland, and Freddie Carmo, who comes from comes from Africa and want to play in the Premier League football. All these persons have nearly no connections. It seems that they live in parallel worlds.
I'm very interested in immigration, partly because I'm a kind of immigrant myself. I was born in Germany and brought up in Hong Kong, and I'm very interested in that range of experiences.
In your school in England?
School in England, and there weren't, both my parents were born. My father was born in Africa, my mother was born in Ireland, and I'm very interested in the way the word immigrant has so many different trajectories inside it. So as you say, Freddie is a footballer from Senegal. He plays for a Premiership team. There's a Zimbabwean traffic warden who is stateless, who has no right to be in the UK. There's a Polish, I suppose he would be an economic migrant, and there's a Hungarian woman who works as a Kindermädchen, a nanny. And I wanted to have that kind of range of diversity of experiences in the book, just because there is that kind of magnet-like effect, I think, in big cities now.
You have only chosen a little number of residents of the Pepys Road. It is compatible with your intention to demonstrate the loss of communication in our times.
Well, I'm very interested in the fact that there is so little contact between. I don't know whether this is a London thing or a more general thing about the way modern cities function, but the people in the street have very little in common with each other. Their lives barely contact each other, and that's a phenomenon I've often noticed. And that geographical communities, I think, are very fragile.
In my review of your novel on the blog, I wrote that I would like to write the next 3 chapters. First, to show my disappointment that I have finished to read your novel, and on the other hand, to demonstrate that you have introduced the person so well that it's easy to invent the next sequel. But this observation is due to your idea to relate only 1 year of the Pepys Road, isn't it so?
Yes, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that was an ambition of mine, to have the feeling that the story is still continuing in the reader's mind. I like works that do that, that have that feeling of the story finishes, but there is also a sense of openness. I very much wanted the reader to have that sense of, that they have their own opinion about what happens afterwards.
In fact, your book contains several novels, but one can count 6 storylines, nearly independent one from each other, as the people who lives in the Pepys Road.
I haven't counted actually, but there are certainly quite a lot of characters and quite a lot of there are a lot of stories and characters in the book. I think it would have been difficult to have more main stories than that without the book kind of ballooning. You have to, as Henry James says, you have to draw a line around the relations at some point.
And there's a suspense created by another story throughout the whole novel, a sort of parallel story. We want what you have is written on a postcard, which received every resident in the street, and is this something which is to unsettle the residents?
Yes, it's the thing that they find it very unsettling, and also in a strange way, it's the only thing they have in common. That they're like, my experience of London has been that people live in kind of parallel privacy that barely brushes against each other, and the element of threat and menace that they get from these postcards with a photograph of their own front door, in a way it's the only thing that characters have in common. It's the thing that pulls them into the same frame.
Yes. The story of these postcards is a single event who combines the residents in the road.
Yes, it is. It's the thing they have in common, and it's the kind of it's the larger narrative that gathers together the different elements of their individual narratives.
You describe in your book also a sort of crisis of modernism. Your novel is far away from only describing the characters.
Modernism in what sense? Aesthetic modernism.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Well, I was very interested in the way that a kind of 19th century approach to fiction had more permission, more freedom. That if I'd been writing the novel in 1850, I would have felt I had this sort of bigger canvas and more permission to be omniscient and to do whatever I like. So I did consciously award myself a kind of carte blanche to have any of those freedoms I wanted. It was also quite interesting, the 19th century ones that I didn't want. You know, it was interesting both ways, the kinds of permission that were useful to have and the ones that sort of didn't feel particularly helpful.
Yeah. May I ask you whether you have first invented the plot, the Pepys wrote the characters, and afterwards you have joined them with the crisis, or did you look for a sort of sleeve or canvas for the social effects of financial crisis?
Now, I started writing it before the crisis, and I felt that something was coming. I started in late 2005, early 2006, and I thought it was very obvious that there was a sharp downturn about to come, just because things felt very, like a bubble, and that people had forgotten the law of gravity, in economic terms. So I started it, and things were still going like that. And then, in fact, the scale of it. So I thought something would happen. The scale of it, obviously, I didn't anticipate a global, crisis of the scale there has been. But at the beginning, I had the strong feeling that the book would begin. And I started writing it before, but the book would begin with the reader knowing something that the characters don't. It's a dramatic irony. The audience knows something is about to happen, and the actors have no idea. And so that the idea of the street going through that period of change, that was the sort of starting point for the book.
The Times wrote, "Kapital is a novel about greed, money and fear." Is it too short, or would you like to say more about to resume your novel?
Well, I think it's also a book about about cities, about people being who the magnet-like effect of great cities. I don't object to it. There's always more you can say. And the other thing I would say is that in a strange way it's almost a historical novel, even though it's set in 2007, 2008. But the shift in people's consciousness over that period is very profound, and the same people, you couldn't tell that story about those people now, because their whole frame of mind would be fundamentally different. I think that's something that's really interesting. It doesn't happen very often historically that you have these quite fundamental shifts in perception and in expectation in like a 5-year period, and that's one of the things that I'm happy to have been. It's been this traumatic time, but from the writer's point of view, it's a fascinating thing to observe this transition, because nobody feels the way everybody felt in 2007.
I read somewhere that you did reread George Eliot's Middlemarch, a study of provincial life, is a story of a little town in the Midlands about 1830. Are there any parallels to the plot of your novel?
I don't think in terms of plot, but the point I was saying earlier about permission, Eliot is very interesting from that point of view, of her omniscience and her willingness to go into characters' consciousness and out, and to talk directly to the reader when she wants to, and to sort of sum things up for the reader when she wants to. All that sort of tool, that 19th century toolkit was very interesting, was very helpful. So it wasn't so much I would say it was not so much the plot or the milieu of her book that was the most interesting. It was the toolkit.
The name of the road, Pepys Road, does he have any relation with Samuel Pepys, the author of the famous diary, who moved out of London in 1971? Where did he move?
He moved to Clapham, which is the area where the book is set. No, you're quite right, and that was a sort of in-joke for the 4 or 5 people in the world who know that was because I don't actually name the area in the book. Yes. I don't say it's Clapham, so it was a kind of gesture for those people who know and care, whom you are clearly one.
Yes. Tell me, who should read your book?
Well, everyone, I hope, but everyone who likes realistic fiction, anyway. And it's been, one of the things that's been interesting is the different responses. It's an interesting thing about a novel with a large canvas, is that people react differently to different parts of it. And it's very interesting what strikes a general chord and what doesn't. And it's quite a striking thing in Germany, that thing about parallel private existence. more Germans recognise that than anywhere else. In lots of places I've been, people say, "Oh, it's not like that here. Everyone knows their neighbours. We're all great friends." But the German consciousness is very like the British consciousness, in that thing of kind of, you barely brush, parallel private lives. That's very interesting to hear about.
When I read your novel, I have also thought about the book of Richard Sennett, The Fall of Public Man.
Yeah, I think his work's very interesting, and I think that that there has been a shift. I mean, the way I think that communities exist quite strongly in lots of people's lives, but they're often to do with work and to do with family and to do with other kinds of networks of interests and other affiliations, and they're often virtual communities now. But community in that geographical sense, the people who live next door to you, you happen to be a community. I think that that's weaker than it's ever been.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.